This is the Speaking of Writers podcast, part of the Keeneland Library Lecture Series. I'm Steve Richards. This is where we bring you conversations with some of the most engaging voices in literature, history, and the world of thoroughbred racing. Today, we're talking with award-winning author and longtime racing journalist Lenny Shulman about his fascinating new book, AP Indy, Championship Racehorse and Breed-Shaping Sire. A son of Seattle Slew and grandson of Secretariat, AP Indy carried one of the most celebrated pedigrees in racing history. But pedigree alone doesn't create greatness. Through injury setbacks, championship performances, and an unprecedented impact at stud, AP Indy became one of the most influential thoroughbreds the sport has ever known. Lenny Shulman takes readers behind the scenes of this remarkable horse's life, sharing stories from the owners, breeders, trainers, jockeys, and caretakers who helped shape his journey. Lenny is an Emmy Award-winning writer and former features editor of The Blood Horse. He's also the author of Justify, 111 Days to Triple Crown Glory, Ride of Their Lives, and head-to-head conversations with a generation of horse racing legends. I'm happy to have Lenny Shulman join me here on the Speaking of Writers podcast. Welcome.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. So what first inspired you to write a full biography of AP Indy?
Well, he was my equine hero. I think I've had two sports figures in my life who have been my heroes. And first one was Roger Maris when I was 6 years old. I know you're a Mets fan, so I'm sorry to say that. But AP Indy was really the other one. Back when I was rediscovering horse racing again, I was living in Los Angeles and he was coming to prominence. And there was just something about the name. There was something about, he had this really unusual way of running, you know, with his head really down close to the track. And, he was no secret. He was a very expensive horse, but he was starting to live up to it. And I just latched onto him. So when University Press of Kentucky started the series, AP Indy was going to be the first one. And I guess they knew that I was a bit of a AP Indy nut. So they asked me, and I was just so delighted to be able to write it and to honor this horse that really meant a lot to me.
AP Indy has one of the most famous pedigrees in thoroughbred history. How much pressure did those bloodlines create around him before he ever stepped onto a racetrack?
Yeah, well, the bloodlines to an extent, but the fact that his owner paid $2.9 million for him as a yearling back in 1990 would have caused more pressure and more expectations around him. He was the highest priced yearling to be sold in the world that year. And so expectations would have been through the roof. It's unusual that a horse is a son of a Triple Crown winner and a grandson of a Triple Crown winner. Not unique, but definitely unusual enough. So he had the pedigree, but then he had the looks. Obviously, he came out looking like $3 million. When you cost that much as a yearling, you know all the parts are there and all the pieces are fit together. So I think all that combined really heightened expectations around him.
Lenny, during your research, what surprised you the most about AP Indy?
Well, I don't know, because I was somewhat well versed in him. I don't know that anything was a shock, but to me, finding the man who was his blacksmith, a gentleman by the name of Joe Carroll. AP Indy, of course, had a scratch from the Kentucky Derby the morning of the race because of a hoof problem. And I had never known who that blacksmith was, how he worked on him, what the story was. And this blacksmith was not only unknown to me, he was unknown to virtually everybody because I couldn't find this guy. I kept asking all these people around Kentucky and people who were at Churchill Downs at the time, and nobody knew who this guy was. And it was only through the luck of a veterinarian who said, "Oh, yeah, I know Joe," that I found this guy. So finding Joe and having him fill in all this blanks of what he did and what the horse was going through, and some of the decision making around the barn and around that Kentucky Derby, that was what I learned the most of in the course of putting this together.
The book details physical issues that threatened his career. How close did racing fans come to never seeing AP Indy fulfill his potential?
Well, there seems to be a little dispute whether he had chronic bad feet or whether he just had this one foot problem. So the foot problem itself wasn't life or career threatening, but a quarter crack is painful and it prevents a horse from giving 100% of his effort. Maybe he could give 80 to 90%, but to the credit of his trainer, Neil Drysdale, he refused to let that horse go to the track at anything less than 100%. So it was Drysdale's patience and letting him heal correctly that allowed him to reach his potential and, his expectation. In the hands of another trainer, maybe he runs in the Kentucky Derby and maybe he injures the opposing limb because of that. And so maybe because of that, we would have never seen him. So it was the patience of Neil Drysdale that was really key in allowing that injury to heal, because the morning of the Kentucky Derby, a lot of people take liberties with their horses, whether they're 100% or not.
His Belmont Stakes victory remains iconic. It wasn't like his grandfather's, Secretariat. What did that performance reveal about his character and athletic ability and a great finish? I was just watching it on YouTube earlier.
Yeah. So he hooked up with the Preakness winner, who was Pine Bluff, as they turned top of the stretch, as they turned for home. And they ran together for a little while. And it's almost like AP Indy said, okay, I've had enough of this. I'm just going to leave you now. And the thing about AP Indy was you couldn't even see the acceleration hardly. It was like he wasn't even hardly exerting himself. And so he pulls away from Pine Bluff, and then a horse named My Memoirs came late and was closing a little. But the thing was, to the naked eye, he doesn't even look like he's taking a deep breath. And then the timer stops in 2:26. He's just run the second fastest Belmont in history, behind his grandfather's untouchable 2:24. But he tied Easy Goer for the second fastest Belmont in the history of the race. And he doesn't look like he's exerting himself.
Not at all.
And that's another question. I really feel like he was underappreciated as a racehorse because he didn't win his races by huge margins. There was no 31 lengths like Secretary. There was no 20 lengths like Flightline. He would win by very modest margins, but it was almost like he was saying, I know what I'm doing here. I know what my job is, and I don't need to expend the extra energy to make it look any better than I need it to be. So, yeah, I think he's super impressive when you look at, as you just did, that Belmont and realize how fast he was actually running without looking like it.
Yes. Why was his Breeders' Cup Classic victory in '92 so important in securing Horse of the Year honors?
Yeah, well, he after the Belmont, Drysdale decided to put him away again for a while. He didn't feel like the hoof was completely 100%. So he put him away. And then 3 months after the Belmont, he came back and ran poorly up at Woodbine in the Molson Million, and then returned to Belmont. And it was going to be his big test against older horses, his first race against older horses in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. And it was a great field. And the gates open, and boom, he goes right down to his knees, and then gets smacked from the outside, gets smacked from the inside. Ran okay, but never threatened Pleasant Tap. So he had a lot to prove that day, Breeders' Cup Day at Gulfstream. He needed to prove it against older horses. And he really needed to prove that he was as good as everybody thought he was. And on that day, Drysdale maintains that he really was 100% for the first time And that field, Steve, was just such a crackerjack field. I mean, Pleasant Tap was already a champion and was winning every handicap race there was that year, except for the one Sultry Song was winning, which were quite a few. You had Thunder Rumble, who had won the Jim Dandy and the Travers. You had Strike the Gold, the previous year's Derby winner. You had 3 Juddmonte horses in there. It was a crackerjack field, and that day he just ran away from them. He left no doubt that he was the best horse in the country right then and there. So, yeah, that was really significant to seal the deal for Horse of the Year. Unfortunately, it also ended up sealing his retirement because Mr. Farish, who had bought back into him, was not buying back into him to race him again. He was buying back into him to breed him. And the fact that he won that race left him with nothing that he needed to prove as far as the breeding world goes. So the downside to that great performance was that was going to be the last time we saw him on the racetrack.
You spoke with many people connected to AP Indy. Was there one story or memory that stood out above all the others?
Well, the guy who I just loved so much and from fandom back in the 80s and 90s in California, Eddie Delahousse, who was his rider. Just maybe I won more money betting on Eddie than anybody else. I don't know. But Eddie's just always been a favorite of mine, and Eddie had so much insight into the horse, including after his first race when he didn't really run well at all. And it was Eddie who got off of him and said to Neil Drysdale, "Hey, there's something wrong with this horse. He's not striding out right. Something's bugging him. He's just not right." And because of Eddie's input, Drysdale correctly surmised that, AP Indy was a ridgeling at that point. He had one testicle that descended normally, but the second testicle did not descend. So Drysdale surmised it was that undescended testicle that was bugging him, and they did the procedure to remove the testicle. And so that was a pretty fascinating turn of events. And from then on, he just, he went on a 7-race winning streak at that point. So, Eddie's insights were just great to hear throughout AP Indy's career, as well as in visiting him afterwards. So I think that's what that was most rewarding to me, was just, having Eddie's input all through it.
Lenny, the bond between horses and their grooms often goes unnoticed by the public. What did you learn about those relationships while writing this book?
Yeah, so AP Indy had 2 grooms after he retired back to Lane's End when he was a stallion. First gentleman was with him about half the time. And then the last 13 or 14 years, Asa Haley was with him. And Asa, I've known just from going to visit AP Indy through the years, because it was soup and sandwich. They were inseparable. You never saw one without the other. So Asa had such a love of that horse and such a bond with that horse that anything he said, you just listen like, it was the voice of God talking to you. And the horse obviously had the bond with him as well. So the stallion manager, a fellow named Bill Sellers, made the point to me that he never had to worry about AP Indy, because if anything was wrong with that horse, Asa knew about it in half a second flat. There was no worry that any problem would go undetected as long as that man was with that horse. So the love of that groom with that horse is such a big part of the story, and it just warms your heart to know how much that horse meant to him. And his son Mineshaft, Asa takes care of now, even though Mineshaft is pensioned now and is not an active stallion. He's still in the stallion barn there, and so Asa takes care of him as well. And he's got the exact same characteristics, according to Asa, as AP Indy had. So it's great stuff.
AP Indy retired after only 11 starts. Do you think fans today appreciate just how brilliant he was, despite a relatively short racing career?
I think not. I don't think he gets his dues as a racehorse. Part of it is because he made such a name for himself as a stallion. So, to the extent that he actually did more as a stallion than he did as a racehorse, but he did more as a stallion than almost anybody did as a racehorse. But you're right. I think the 11 starts, the fact that he didn't have that 4-year-old season to race kind of diminished, what people might have thought about him as a racehorse. And then, as I mentioned, the modest margins of victories in some of these races, perhaps. But yeah, he was underappreciated, and I make the point in the book. The Blood Horse in 2000 put out a book of the 100 greatest racehorses of the 20th century, and AP Indy finished 101st in the poll. Now, I was not with the Blood Horse when that book came out. I dare say if I had been, he probably would have gotten enough votes to be in the top 100. But the fact that he wasn't in the top 100 of that century's racehorses, in their opinion, kind of tells you, that he was underappreciated.
Lane's End Farm became synonymous with AP Indy. What did you discover about his life after racing that readers may find fascinating?
Yeah, he had a huge fan club there. When you went to see him, there would usually be other people there asking to see him. He was very popular there all the time, even before these organized horse tours came around. So there would always be people there. He was very popular. Yeah, I got to spend a lot of time with him, thankfully. And so I got to know his personality a little bit. Some days he would spend a lot of time with me. Other days he decided not to. But I brought a lot of peppermints just to kind of tip the scales in my favor as much as I could. He was a character. What I learned is he was a character. He would run around for a while and come back and let you play with him for a while, and then he'd go eat some grass, and he'd come back and let you kiss on him and love on him for a while. And he had a personality, and it's one of the things that I really enjoy about this book is I try, all of his achievements are in this book. Everything he did is in this book, but also I try to put who he was in this book as well. Some of that personality and talking to the people who had a hand on him every day and people like myself who visited him. So to that extent, and to whatever extent we can actually glean what their personality is, I'd like to say that I've tried to impart that as a big part of that as well.
The book highlights not only a horse, but an entire ecosystem of people around him. Why was it important to tell those human stories alongside AP Indy's story?
Well, I think, to do the research right, which I wanted to do for everything that I do, but for this horse in particular, I wanted to just do the best I could. I got very lucky and was able to talk to people from virtually every part of his development. The guy who brought his dam to be bred to Seattle Slew, he was driving the van the day that he was conceived. So I got to talk to him. I got to talk to the man who was the yearling manager. I got to talk to the man who was the stallion manager, to the farm managers, to the man who broke him as a yearling, to his racetrack trainer. So in order to tell the story right, you have to have all of these people's input into who this horse was and what they did with him and the trials and tribulations along the way. So I was just so happy that all of that fell into place, and I was able to, talk to virtually everybody. The man who owned him, Mrs. Suramaki, had passed away, and the man who bought him from Mrs. Suramaki, Noel O'Callahan, had passed away. And unfortunately, Mr. Farish is kind of ailing now and really isn't able to talk, although I have talked with him a lot through the years about AP Indy. So with those exceptions, I think I got to everybody who had anything to do with him.
All right, Lenny, we're going to wrap up here with our rapid fire round. First thing that comes to mind when I ask you these questions here. First one, Secretariat or Seattle Slew?
Oh gosh. I'm gonna say Seattle Slew. You're not gonna let me explain, but I'll say Seattle Slew because I got to see him and spend time with him as well. So he's very special to me.
Favorite race you revisited while writing this book?
Probably his Belmont. Yeah, his Belmont Stakes.
Most emotional interview for this project?
Probably with Asa the groom. Yeah. Yeah, I think we both got emotional during that. Yeah.
Most underrated AP Indy offspring?
Underrated. Oh, well, I'm going to say Bernardini because he lost the Breeders' Cup Classic. I think it was a jockey error. So unlike AP Indy, he didn't get to do it in the Breeders' Cup Classic. And like AP Indy, he was retired right after that as a 3-year-old. So, as a racehorse, he had a lot more to give.
One word that best describes AP Indy?
Smart.
Favorite racetrack?
Belmont Park.
A racing book every fan should read?
Oh gosh, it's sitting on my shelf here. You got me. I'm not going to come up with it in time. Well, I have a friend named Kim Wickens who wrote a great book called Lexington about him, which I think everybody should read because it's a fantastic piece of work.
He is Lenny Shulman, the author of the new book, AP Indy Championship Racehorse and Breed-Shaping Sire. The book is a compelling look at one of the most influential thoroughbreds in modern racing history, a horse whose greatness extended far beyond the finish line and whose bloodlines continue to shape the sport today. For more information on Lenny Shulman and his work, visit your favorite bookseller and racing publication outlets. Lenny, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Thanks for having me.
And this has been the Speaking of Writers podcast, part of the Keeneland Library Lecture Series that we're doing. And don't forget to subscribe to the Speaking of Writers podcast on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple, and wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for watching and for listening. I'm Steve Richards. I will talk to you again next time.